our website. So welcome to the Ohio Children's Trust Fund hosted Lunch and Learn with Brittany Pope from Ohio Guidestone, who is going to be talking with us today about helping new dads thrive. April is Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Month in Ohio, and it is National Child Abuse Prevention Month. During the month of April, the Trust Fund likes to host some lunch and learns, which are opportunities for some of our partners to share about the wonderful work that they are doing. We're really excited to have Brittany and her colleagues share with us today. Brittany, last year in 2021, was our keynote speaker for our April Child Abuse Prevention Month kickoff event. And so I know she is a very dynamic speaker. Just a little bit about Brittany. She is a wife, mother, and a multidisciplinary leader. She's an adult educator and a lifelong learner. And she is frequently sought out for consensus building and rallying stakeholders. She is often recognized for her communication skills and advocacy for family and community respect and engagement to support critical childhood development and opportunities to impact and improve education, family, and community functioning. She has 15 plus years of experience within and affinity with urban settings, collaborating with community members and various professionals led by servant leadership, racial and social justice, healing-centered engagement, and people-first principles. Brittany currently facilitates and leads applied science and research operations for a community mental health social services organization, which is Ohio Guidestone, utilizing an interdisciplinary and cross-departmental spirit of collaboration. She executes strategic planning, elevates innovation, bolsters equity and justice-centered practices, and she leads with grace and inclusion. And Brittany, I am just really excited to have you here today, and I'm going to just turn it over to you to get started. I know that towards the end of the presentation, she will be taking questions. So if you have questions, feel free to enter them in the chat as we go forward today.
Thank you, thank you. Again, as Lindsay already said, I am Brittany Pope from Ohio Guidestone. I cannot wait to introduce the rest of the team today, but we're really grateful to Ohio Children's Trust Fund for, no pun intended, all of their trust, as well as all of their collaboration, as we all are joined on the same path, trying to figure out how to make the world a better place for children. No matter how corny or cliche-ish that sounds, it's our truth. So I trust and believe that many of you share the same path, so welcome. Today we will talk about helping new dads thrive. And this is a very introductory training talking about paternal depression and the need for fatherhood equity, all in the scope of thinking about what does this mean for children and families and communities. A little bit about who we are, where we come from, as Lindsay mentioned. We are from an organization called Ohio Guidestone, pretty much follows the T of Northern Ohio and a strip all the way down 71 going towards Central Ohio. We are a behavioral health organization, and we run the continuum for a variety of services. The area that we operate out of is known as the Institute of Family and Community Impact. It is our center of excellence for research, clinical innovation, and advocacy. We have a very, very proud focus on family relational health, early childhood development, and parent mental health. I've already had a chance to introduce myself to you as the Director of Applied Clinical Sciences and Research and a lead fellow at Ohio Guidestone's Institute for Family and Community Impact. I'll share the floor so the rest of our team can introduce themselves to you all as well. Shakita.
Hi, I'm Shakita Ivy. I'm the Father's Feeling Project and Visit Coordinator and Parent Coach at Ohio Guidestone.
Hi, I'm Angie Vespoli.
Hey, Brittany. It's hard to hear you.
It's hard to hear me right now.
Can you hear me?
We had a couple comments in the chat, Brittany, that it was just a little bit harder to hear you. So maybe if you could speak closer to the speaker.
Okay, I will. Is this a little better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. If somebody could just jump back off mute and let me know, I can't see you all, so I might miss some verbal, flags waving me down. Thank you so much. Sorry, back to you, Angie.
That's okay. I'm Angie Vespoli. I'm a licensed independent social worker, and I'm the lead research assessor for the Father's Feelings Project.
And I'm Mike D'Agostino. I'm the lead research assistant for the Department of Applied Clinical Sciences and Research at Ohio Guidestone. I'm also the content editor for the Institute of Family and Community Impact, our Center of Excellence. After doing some community mental health work for a bit for Ohio Guidestone, I joined this research department in 2019 with an intention to focus specifically on our paternal depression study. I'm also a dad with 3 elementary school aged kids.
All righty, thank you. So if someone can give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, is it better to hear me now? Okay, I'll keep going. So quick learning goals for today. What to expect out of this? Our goal is to help increase awareness of perinatal paternal depression, talk about how we can support new fathers as well as their mental health while they are navigating the most beautiful and the most interesting time known as a child's first year of life, seeing how in the world do we correlate maternal and paternal depression, as well as what does that mean to early childhood in a child's life, identify the importance of play between fathers and children, and identify paternal mental health outcomes as a childhood and family protective factor. I'm sure many of you all being associated and operating with OCTF, and again, with April being Childhood Maltreatment and Abuse Prevention Month, we're always talking about protective factors. And one of the biggest things that we want to walk away with this session is knowing that fathers are not only to be spoken about from a deficit. When we talk about children not having a father at home or a risk factor, we want to talk about how positive and protective fathers are, not just in the stereotypical way, not just in the instinctual genetic way, but because they are a protective factor within themselves for children as well as for family outcomes. So we're hoping that we'll be able to walk away knowing that we hit some of these goals. Don't worry, we are not going to quiz you. We'll let you work on the honor system. All righty. Simply put, dads get depression too. So I love that the chat is bubbling away right now. Give us a thumbs up, thumbs down with the emoji. Give us some sort of signal, type in some words in the chat. Let us know if this is a new phrase or a new phenomenon to you, that dads can become depressed during their child's pregnancy as well as afterwards. And again, throughout the whole session today, you might be eating, you might be driving, but if you do got hands and fingers free, please type away. We love to see interactions this way. So let's talk more about this. What do we know about perinatal depression? First off, I am a big nerd word, so I always feel like, what in the world do these words mean? Perinatal in itself just means around birth. So perinatal captures the time that we often might call prenatal. So those months of pregnancy up to childbirth. And then postpartum doesn't have as clear of a definition. It can be flexible, but for the sense in the frame that we're using it, we talk about within the first month or the first 12 months of a child's life. So perinatal depression can also be looked at as an umbrella, if you will, or a complex where it captures and includes depression, but also captures anxiety as well. And so what we also know is that surprisingly, maternal and paternal depression are strongly correlated, which means if mom has maternal depression, there's a greater risk or a likelihood or a connection that dad might, and vice versa. And what's interesting as the research is continuing to grow is this extends even beyond the perinatal period. So beyond when that child is 1 year of age. So both maternal and paternal depression are really important. Looking at how in the world do we need to learn more about both, but particularly as I'm peeking really quickly, that it was never heard of, never discussed. This is new, definitely not new, but needs more recognition. I feel like everybody is vibing saying the same thing, ranging from, no, I never even heard of paternal depression, didn't know daddies can get depressed, to like, yeah, heard of it, but I think we are all on the same page. It needs more attention. Some of the areas that we also know about some of the characteristics or how we've captured or heard about paternal depression is that the symptoms for fathers tend to be highest during the 3rd trimester. That's really important to think about, because oftentimes when we think about paternal depression in itself, we're thinking about PPD, postpartum depression. So things that happen after baby has gotten here, because a lot of times there's the assumption that everything is a chemical change. If we were in person, I would invite you to see if I yawn, how many other people will yawn. Or if you're like me and a giggler, if we started laughing and giggling, how many people might start laughing and giggling and you're not really even sure why you're laughing and giggling. A yawn and a laugh within itself is a neurobiological change of chemicals, a cascade that connects between your brain and your body. If we can compel changes between strangers, how much more likely is it that we experience changes within our bodies? For this instance, talking about fathers, even if they are not the ones carrying a baby. We go through changes interpersonally as human beings, from as simple as a yawn to as serious as paternal depression. The other instance where we find that paternal depression symptoms tend to be the highest is at that 3 to 6 months postpartum period. And what is also interesting is this is noted as one of the most intense times for mothers experiencing postpartum depression as well. And what might paternal depression look like? I say might because we all know that there could be a range or a continuum of the way symptoms are felt, the way they look, or even signs or risk factors. And going back to what we already pointed out, that we got to do a lot more work to learn more about paternal depression. So we don't even know if these are all of the signs and symptoms, which we'll hint at. This is the whole point of what we're doing here. But what we know so far is that if a father has already experienced depression in the past, or is currently experiencing depression at the onset of pregnancy, childbirth, or within that child's first life, that could be a more likelihood of experiencing depression in an elevated or specific way related to fatherhood. A low or changed social, family, or relational health, increased stress, anger, irritation, fatigue, increased alcohol or substance abuse, nervousness, and the lack of access to child-father interactions. So here we have some risks as well as some signs and symptoms combined. What else might you know? Go ahead and throw it in the chat, because as I said, we're constantly learning, we're constantly collecting. What in the world does paternal depression look like, feel like? What could be some of the signs and symptoms that are showing us a dad is going down that road or reaching the point of being overwhelmed by said symptoms? Because we want to prevent it. We want to treat it. We want to be responsive. How awful would that be that we continue on knowing how serious and important something is, and we don't find a way to address it? We don't find a way to address it from an upstream factor, meaning prevention. We're not waiting until dads are absent. Because guess what? We accept withdrawal as a symptom of everyday common depression. I wonder how many fathers, hear me out, that we say are absent and are actually experiencing depression. And you may say like, well, he wasn't crying his eyes out. He wasn't, falling over himself sad. Hey, guess what? In the 90s, when women kept suffering heart attacks and not coming into the hospital, it was befuddling everyone because they're like, how come you didn't listen to the symptoms that your body was telling you? Guess what? We learned that even though women and men, biologically speaking, do not have too many differences in the anatomy and physiology of their hearts and cardiology system. But guess what? The way they experience heart attacks, the symptoms can be very different. So we use that as a comparison also often also here for paternal depression. We can't just keep saying, well, dad didn't do this, this, and that. There's no depression. Hey, we might be on the brink of breaking through in a similar way as what we learned with heart attacks, that this very, very serious issue being parental depression, particularly for fathers, it looks and feels differently. So we need to look and respond differently and appropriately. Thank you all. I see things that you all are throwing in the chat. I appreciate it. We're going to keep rolling and keep collecting those because we are not the end all be all with all of this information. But I'm going to pass it over to one of my colleagues who actually helped us start this initiative from her experience as a home visiting service provider and having expertise working with mothers and infants. So Shakita, I turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Brittany. How you guys? As I said earlier, I'm a visit coordinator, and I do the parent and coaching with the fathers online, which is a virtual session. But my personal experience as a home visitor, I would like to share with you guys. I worked as a home visitor in the community with pregnant moms, and they had kids under 2. So at my visit, it was time to screen mom for postpartum with the Edinburgh screening. And I seen dad there, and I'm like, hey, and I don't see a lot of dads in the community like that. And he was like, excuse me, what do you have for me? So I look in my bag, and I called myself at the time the resource queen. So I'm just thinking like, I got this whole bag of resources. I'm a new worker. I'm gonna save the world. And he's like, what do you got for me? So I'm like, oh, I got stuff. So I opened the folders that I have prepared, and all I had was like jobs for felons. All I had was establishing paternity for or child support, things like that, or workforce. But I had nothing for like men's wellness or how to reduce stress or how do they feel. And then that's what he actually told me. He was like, I need services too. What do you got for me? You guys don't have anything? I'm like telling him what I have. And he's like, no, I'm stressed too. And I'm like, wow. So it's like I took it back to my supervisor. She already had a dad's program running previously in that department, but another worker had mentioned it. And then it started the conversation of what fathers need, what they want, which prompted her to even like get it to really push the Yates screening for paternal depression. And it's like really needed for dads. And the things that we found out that was barriers is that they don't have any support groups for they won't feel alone or someone to talk to. Like dads are lacking that. The one father told me that he has financial stress of being responsible and being financially ready to raise his child. How is his child going to eat? She gets to be on the system, but how me as a dad, how do I like work and what's the daycare price? And he was just overwhelmed financially and emotionally. And how does a good dad look to him? So it was just like, wow, they need more like centered support groups that target around dads in the community, that people look like them and then feel like they are not alone. Every day I talk to dads and they're like, I'm like, you're not the only one. I mean, I got lawyers that saying childcare is too much. And barriers they feel like now some of them are CEOs of companies or was CEOs, and now they're at home because of COVID with kids because they have to do what the family needs. So a lot of roles are changing in the homes, and dads are I got a lot of dads that are the primary parents at home. So just like we just need more screenings for dads, just as we need for moms. All right. And then I'll pass it over to Mike. I'm sorry. I'll pass it over to Mike.
So I wanted to share a little bit about my experiences as a father, because at first, when I first became a dad, I thought I was going to, all I had to do was do all the things that my wife did to be a good dad. I didn't have a very healthy concept of fatherhood because of my experiences of toxic masculinity in our culture that was not absent from many of the fathers I knew growing up. And my belief that masculinity meant aloofness and anger and aggression, which were traits that I did not see or want to see in myself. So I thought all I had to do were do the motherly routines, changing diapers, feeding the baby, learning how to use the complicated baby wrap so I could carry her. And so while I did have to do those things, they didn't make me mom number 2 or mom light or the babysitter when mom isn't around. And it took me a long time to kind of figure this out. I just kind of kept going with the flow. And I did develop depression during one of my children's infancy. And that was the child that, as a baby, I felt the least connected to. She clung very closely to my wife, which was different from the other ones. And I realized I couldn't fulfill mom's role. And what I eventually figured out is I didn't have to be a second mom. Dads are supposed to be nurturing. They're supposed to be silly and fun. They're supposed to be like what I was. So I couldn't do the things that my wife could, but she couldn't do the things that I could. The way that I engage my children, the way that I play with them and sing to them at night and read to them, it was different. It was, and it was part of my masculinity. I, came to terms with eventually. So now I realize I can be the dad that I am, and that is good enough. And not only good enough, but that's actually what my children really need. They don't want me to be mom. They want me to be dad.
Thank you, Mike. We always say that we are overly blessed to have Mike's expertise. So thank you so much for sharing with us, whether you're sharing with us on paper or sharing here. I just want to give you shine and kudos publicly. Thank you for that. All righty. To my favorite part, research, because I do research, but also kind of just numbers. We are not going to bore you with the research. One of the biggest things that I want to pay attention on this slide is that there is a lot of research done on mothers and maternal depression. And although we have a lot of research on mothers and maternal depression, it is really lacking. It's not responsive in recognizing of the intersections of different identities, whether they're cultural, societal, economic, racial, ethnic identities, but also just in the ways in which we have done research, especially psychological research, over the last 100 years. The root of psychological research is toxic, it's dangerous, it's colonizing, and it was a tool to marginalize even further. And it was a tool that was wielded to harm. Well, the last probably about 4 or 5 decades, there have been so many researchers like myself and maybe many of you looking to overhaul that. So as much as we know that there's so much more research on mothers and maternal depression, and it has so much more work to go, I'm always at a loss when we get to paternal depression. And just to make sure that I wasn't kind of, tripping, I did a whole nother literature search yesterday, looking for books on Amazon and looking for things on Google. And yeah, we still are at a lack. And we have to keep going and learning more about fathers and not just doing research on, doing research with. But some key research-based takeaways before I pass it to Angie to talk about clinical research takeaways is that depression in men in generally, it's about a 5% rate. That's almost double in the perinatal stage, double. But yet we are not hearing about it. We're not doing as much research as we could. This is an example of what we're doing to be data informed and to be responsive. Like, whoa, we see a number, we see a statistic, and it's not good enough just to share it on the news. It's not good enough just to put it on our Facebook page. It's not good enough just to put it in our funding proposals when we're looking to get money. We have to be meaningfully responsive and say, wow, if dads during and after pregnancy are experiencing twice the rate of depression, which we believe is a lot higher, we got to do something. And then when we look particularly at anxiety, we know that anxiety is experienced even more so than depression that we know of in men in generally. So we can assume comparably like depression, that number can be anywhere to double or more. The other things that we are learning, again, more and more from research, is that perinatal depression in men does not look like maternal depression in women. And what we are going to continue to keep doing is, well, what does that look like across intersections of not just sex differences when we're looking at, chromosomes, but how does that look for gender differences, right? So more research is needed because we're literally just at the tip of the iceberg, so to say. And then some of the most impactful, at least for me, when I think about, wow, like this is huge. So many unintended negative impacts due to the experiences or the phenomena of perinatal paternal depression occurred in outcomes for infants and even for older children. So it really is important that we look at the gaps that we're seeing in research, in practice, and policies, and we tackle them. I'm going to pass it over to Angie to continue talking about what we know from research and more so from a clinical perspective. Angie?
Thanks, Brittany. So as many of you are already aware, men are less likely than women to seek help for mental health issues. And this can be tied to the culturally and socially prescribed gender roles and expectations for men to be mentally strong, independent, invulnerable, and self-reliant when faced with adversity. So emotional expression and asking for help are seen more as feminine traits. And there's still this stigma attached to help seeking for men. And we know the disparity in seeking help is not due to men experiencing depression less, because although women are twice as likely to be diagnosed with depression compared to men, men are 4 times more likely than women to commit suicide. Also, the expression of depression, as Brittany talked a little bit about, tends to differ in men versus women. So men are more likely than women to express their depression with more externalizing symptoms, such as anger, irritability, impulse control, or alcohol abuse, whereas women tend to internalize symptoms, and they may show up more as feelings of worthlessness or guilt, for example. Men also tend to underreport the severity of their symptoms compared to women. And Black men are even less likely than their white counterparts to seek mental health care. Many factors that contribute to this include institutional racism and discrimination, access to care, mistrust of healthcare providers, and misdiagnosis or clinician bias, again, due to a lot of these socially prescribed gender roles with men and women. Also, there's many more white clinicians than there are ethnic minority clinicians, which can also be another barrier to care. So since postpartum depression is not widely recognized in men, and the screening tools for postpartum depression in general were developed specifically for women, which didn't include male typical symptoms, men may be unaware that their behaviors are associated with depression and thus not seek help, as well as clinicians as well, not being attuned to diagnosing and addressing it. So they're generally not asked how they're doing or screened for depression after having a child. So why are we interested in screening for paternal depression, and why do we need screens for dad? Simply because we don't have a screening tool made for dads specifically.
Thank you, Angie. And that probably is the most impactful. If you could read our notes, we have it in all caps. No screen exists for men, for dads. So that is what we decided to do about a good 6 years ago, after hearing from Shakita's supervisor, our resident guru and expert and advocate for dads, Ira Yates, our then director of psychology, chief clinical officer, and myself when I joined. We put our heads together. We built a lot of consensus to get support to actually develop a paternal perinatal depression screen. And so what we did was we looked at, okay, well, we know that some experiences of depression are depression. So we pretty much built half of our questions adopted from already validated tools such as the PHQ-9. And then we went through about 100 different items to scale down to 11 items, particularly what we felt really got at the experiences of fathers. And what was really beautiful, the clinical psychologist leading this initiative at the time, he was a father himself. And he had a range of fatherhood to reflect on. His name is Dr. Robert Bryan Denton, one of my really close colleagues and friends. He had children who were going into adulthood, and he had toddlers. So he felt as if he could reflect back and look kind of at the middle, and then look at where he was now with his younger children, and then adopt a really clinical and research approach to lived experiences as well. And so we took those 100-something questions, items, got them scaled down to about 11 additional items. We shared this tool with a lot of people. Some of you who might be on this call today might have gotten an email from us that said, hey, do these questions read well? Did the instructions make sense? And if you are a father, if you've experienced depression as a male, and if you are a male father who's experienced depression, are we getting at it? Are we kind of getting at it? And so we're not revealing it, because right now we are actually still testing to validate the tool. We are probably about a good year and a half out for the tool to be made public, made readily available, so that you and all of your spaces can screen fathers, pediatric spaces, as well as anywhere where they touch children or fathers. They will be able to have this tool where we can identify the possibility that a father might be on his way, or more at risk, we might say, of experiencing depression. So right now the tool is only accessible via our research protocol. Again, that's just the progress to be responsible with research. Make sure you're robust in your testing. And our goal with our research around this tool is to see, is the tool sensitive enough? So we compare it to a current postpartum depression tool. And, and we wanted to know, is it accurate? So we actually take fathers through a brief clinical interview, because we don't want people just to look at a number and say, you got 10 points on this, you're depressed. No, we want it to be a tool that is informative and empowering, both for a clinician or a community professional working with fathers or families. And then we do have a robust ethical review of the tool, making sure that we thought of all of the safety parameters, making sure before we put in the hands of individuals to use, that we thought of what type of training is used and what type of programs are going to be available. Because who cares if you have a high ACEs or a high depression or a high anything score on a risk tool, if you don't have people ready to respond, and if you don't have programming, if you don't have funding from the local, state, federal level, and if you don't have policies that are not a barrier to making sure when we do identify a father who might have depression, that nothing is in the way of that dad getting the help that he needs. So what we'll do is we're going to continue to shift. And I know you're probably like, oh, wait, bring that screening tool back. As you can tell, like we said in the beginning, this is a really introductory session. And you probably read when you signed up, but we will talk about it at the end. We have 2 more follow-up sessions, lunch and learn, really similar to this, but a community of learners and a community of practitioners like yourselves who might say, look, Britt, how can I get on with this tool now? How can we learn about the research now? Or, hey, how can we prepare to be one of the practitioners or the organization, or just a really, really great neighbor and community member who's ready to respond to these fathers, who's ready to be responsive to their needs, and create innovative options that are intentional for dads, that are not just made for moms and we kind of erase and scratch out the mom and say like, oh, dads too. We want to make sure dads know that they're not an afterthought, that they're important, and that we will center them as we seek to build equity for them. And we don't need a separate tool for dads. But we know that it's a little step more than being equal. It's about being fair. It's about being responsive to what we see. We know that dads have slightly different needs. So we're going to give them slightly different things to meet their needs. We want to look at policies and procedures that decenter and underserved and marginalized fathers. I tell this as a joke, but it's really not funny when I think about it. We didn't even let fathers into the delivery room, the operating space, when their own children were being born. And I want to be really careful because that statement is not to be an encroachment on women's rights or the autonomy that a woman or a birthing person has over their body. Other things we want to think about are what policies are in place. I'm not sure if you all know this, but fathers recently had to have a law that says, hey, let's make sure we try to find a dad before a child is adopted. Think about that. We needed a law for something that I don't think that we would ever think about in the instance of a mother. Or consider this, a father has to demonstrate that he can and should be a part of their child's life if they're unmarried. Hear me out. Values and different perspectives aside, fathers matter, right? Whether they are married to the mother of the baby, whether they live in that home, whether they have different cultural centering practices. But the fact that we have a law that says right now that a father has to petition the court to see his child, and one of the best avenues to do that is to make sure he pays child support. And that's not a problem, we're not arguing that. But think about it. Those are a lot of hoops and loops to jump through, and they're not cheap. Any given county throughout the state, the cost could be almost a few $100s just to work to try to establish paternity, just to be able to have access and see your child and father them. So I raise these points because we often put a lot of weight on fathers. We often say, where's the father? Oh, I bet that wouldn't happen if the father. We talk about fathers and we recognize how important they are, but more so in a deficit perspective. We want to shift the narrative, raise equity for fathers by saying, look, you are important, you're necessary, and you're worthy. What are all of the fairness, the equity-centered, and the just steps we need to take to make sure we are serving fathers? Because that's a whole human, just like a mother. And how do we make sure that child gets everything they need from mother and father and other community resources? One of the things we talk about to address equity is we need to enhance positive socialization of fatherhood, beginning in childhood. I will not ask you to do this openly. So I'm a church girl, so I'm not going to ask you to turn to your neighbor and answer this. But I do want to ask you to think about how often you hear a little voice talking about, oh, one day when I'm a father. And then if you are a father or identify as a male and an adult, I want you to think about those times when you did have daydreams about being a father. I want you to think about the times where you're like, oh yeah, I knew I was going to name my child this, or I imagined my child would look this way. Because guess what? I do not want this to be the best kept secret anymore. Men daydream and they imagine and they plan and they have goals if they want to be a father, just a similar way as people who want to become a mother one day. And we need to recognize that and be responsive to that in the way we deal with each other as humans, and the way we practice in our different professions, and the way that we build programs and policies. Attention to fathers as a prevention strategy is also very critical. And not in the sense of let's make sure dad doesn't hurt that baby. No, mothers and fathers do hurt babies, right? That's why we have a whole month dedicated to child abuse, maltreatment, and neglect prevention. But not only looking at fathers as, oh, let's make sure that father doesn't hurt. No, fathers being present is a critical prevention strategy for ACEs, for all of the toxic stress and trauma you hear about, as well as the lifelong implications of development in early childhood. Other things that we want you to hear about are stories from dad. I can tell you the research all day, every day. We could talk about numbers. I can make this sound all great and cool, but let's hear from some of our team, Angie, who's going to share 2 stories from a dad, and then we're actually going to let you hear a dad from a dad himself. So Angie, I turn it over to you to share some of your stories that you get to hear from our dads.
So thanks, Brittany. Being part of this study really gives us a unique opportunity to talk one-on-one with dads about, what their needs are and what their experiences are, and what they see as maybe would be more helpful for them to have in being able to do a lot more with their kids. And so one of the interesting stories that one of the dads I was talking to brought up was that, he takes his kids to story time. And he mentioned that, at the library, he only sees moms and grandmothers with their kids. And he thought it would be really helpful, or would be really nice if there was a story time specifically for dads and for kids, so that he could meet with and talk with other dads. So on another situation, there was a dad who was much more introverted, but he talked about, wanting to find other dads to talk to too, that had kids with similar ages, to get just information on just general parenting tips or advice, and just be able to talk to each other. He was more introverted, so he talked about, looking for some online groups so that he could meet up with other dads, but he had tried looking for those and couldn't find any that were available. And so now we wanted to share one of our dad's personal stories. So we have a video here that he'll share his personal story.
So tell me about, you said hugs and kisses and you have 2 boys. Tell me about that. That seems so normal.
Yeah, I overlove my children, just like they'll get, disciplined, but I'll also make sure I kiss and hug and tell them I love them as much every day as I every day.
So is play another way of expressing your love to your son?
Yes, because let's say if my son's asking me to play all day and I'm finally like, okay, let's go. Just the look on his face when he's shooting the ball or kicking the ball into the soccer net, whatever we're doing, the look on his face is telling me that there is a real joy here. Even if we're just standing next to each other looking at the sky, he just wants to be outside with me.
You're sharing space.
And sharing time, me and both boys.
So we shared that story from my dad, and there's more of the interview. And what we really wanted to highlight was, if you saw his reaction in the beginning, it was like, yeah, I love and kiss. Like, I was interviewing him and I felt it and saw it. And it really took me aback, even myself, being a fatherhood advocate, was like, wow, I asked him this question as if it was something he doesn't just naturally do, something he normally does. And so I see some things going on in the chat that, hey, glad we got books about to tell dads how to be responsible. Do we have support groups? I still don't really see dads. Here's my challenge. If you are in a space where you don't see dads, invite a dad. If you are looking for social media groups, and if you are in a mom group, ask them, where's the dad group? Or is there a way that we can be more inclusive? Sometimes that's not the mission of a group and it's not the scope. I also would challenge you, when you're looking for resources for books for dads, telling dads what to do, let's pull that back. Remember the reaction from this dad here. No one taught me about hugs and kisses. I knew it. It's instinctual. It's in them. So let's make sure we're remembering, when we think of these dad stories, when we are looking to create responsive and innovative options on purpose, that we do it with them. And sometimes it may be about like, all right, well, let me move out of the way. Because they don't need women and mothers coming to tell them what to do. They don't need lawmakers. They don't need scientists. They don't need researchers to come and tell them what to do or to do something on or for them. They need us to do things with them or make sure we make space for them. So thank you for listening to that story. Angie, thank you so much. Angie probably has 1,000,001 other stories. We have one more dad story, but here we just want to tell you a little bit about our project. Thinking about everything that you heard, thinking about this screening tool, and how we got to having this thing that we have here called the Father's Feelings Project. So I'll turn that over to Mike.
Yeah, so as Brittany mentioned, we started this project, and when I came on, this is what it was. We were doing an in-home or in-community single visits, sometimes 2 visits, simply to validate the Yates tool that we've been talking about. But as we went on, well, we wanted to keep expanding it to include more dads. And then, COVID happened and we had to shut down our research for a time. And during that time, we took a step back and said, okay, what are we missing here? Because we have dads that are participating in the study and we're doing the tool, but there's so much more that they're telling us they want to say and they want to do. And And we realized that there's so few resources for dads that dads are often aware of. We're building more and more every day. We're learning more about what resources are available to us, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. But dads are not always aware of that. They just have not been primed to be connected to that. So we started expanding our study to be multiple visits, a full clinical depression and anxiety screening, brief interventions, and warm handoff protocol for fathers. We extended it statewide throughout Ohio, thanks to funding from OCTF. And we're doing the visits virtually to be able to get dads all over the place. So we work very closely as a team now, Shakita and Angie and I particularly, to figure out okay, so this dad has this particular need. How can we find that for him? Who do we know? Who are our partners? And so from that, we built a manual that we developed for our study. And Angie will talk about kind of the first step of that, which is the clinical screening that she does as a part of this project.
Okay, I'll make this brief because I know we're short on time. So I'm the lead research assessor for the Father's Feelings Project. So I meet with the dads over Zoom, and I administer the 2 depression screening tools. So the one that we've developed specifically for men that we're validating, and then an already validated depression screening tool. So then I'll do a very brief semi-structured clinical assessment and get a history of dad's mental health issues or treatment and assess for suicide risk. And then I get general medical history about the dad, the birth, mom's, any issues that mom had or complications or depression. And then we find out more about, what dad's role is with their child and, what the family dynamics are like. And then assess for their level of social support and any needs that they identify. And I always try to focus on their strengths so that we can build on those strengths and get them to start thinking about what they do well and bring that into each subsequent session. And then I do a short intervention that may be around a mindfulness technique or calming technique, just depending on the dad's need. And I always talk about the screening results with dad, and we will always offer the dad to talk to a counselor, regardless of what their score is on the screening tool. Because we have found many dads who don't even meet criteria for depression, but they still really want to talk with a counselor. So we help facilitate this referral and make sure that dad gets connected. If there is any imminent risk of harm, we develop a safety plan and get immediate help. But then Shakita, which she's going to talk about next, does her fatherhood coaching visits. And then I meet with the dad for a final visit and just go over the screening tools again and follow up on any needs or concerns. Okay, so I'll let Shakita talk now about her role.
Thanks, Ms. Angie. So basically during the fatherhood coaching intervention sessions, I pretty much do a lot of role playing. I think I have my first teen dad coming up. So Brittany got me the dolls and the diapers so I can actually start role playing with the changing the diaper and how to hold the baby and swallow the baby and things like that. So I'm pretty much do role playing. A lot of dads are virtually involved, and over the visits, they get kind of comfortable. And basically, they just really thank me for listening to them and having a voice. Their dads are so simple. I'm they were just thanks for listening to me and hearing me out. So just building that relationship and interventions. And then I bring in Joy, which is joyful play. So I teach about that and how you can just do things like do I Spy when the kid gets older in the car. Things are free and doesn't cost any money. You don't have to put any things together. Simple. Sometimes when you change the diaper, dads can do peekaboo. So it's just things like that that are really simple, but dads are already doing that. They're already flying the kids like an airplane. They're already doing that. So I just kind of like reiterate what they're doing, but I really want to emphasize that I really am just put my priority on self-care for dads, because they're running around, they're working extra hours, they don't know what to do with mom. And I'm like, just simple, just ask her, what do you need from me? And sometimes they don't know what, and then they just like run from her. It's like, I see this face and I just run. I'm like, next time just ask, what do you need from me? He's like, that actually worked. I'm like, getting my feelings out. So they just like we grow together. They teach me, I teach them. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful program. And I'm happy to be a part of it. So, okay, I think this is, next is Mike explaining on the project and now the eligibility.
Yeah, so we really expanded, like I had mentioned before, our eligibility requirements. So basically right now, if there's a dad who lives in Ohio who has a child who is 12 months old or younger, or they're expecting a baby, basically they're eligible for the study. So there's very little criteria that's going to keep dads from participating. In addition to kind of our main structure of our study, we also got a very generous grant from OCTF to do early childhood safety items. So what that means is that dads who are TANF eligible, and we have a process for where we determine that with dads when they sign up, they are eligible for up to $400 in infant safety items. So that means a lot of different things: pack and plays, cribs, car seats, bottle sets, and all kinds of stuff like that. So we are looking for dads from all over the place, dads that you work with, to sign up for this study, and we want to get them as much help as we can. We want to partner with other fatherhood resources to both get people into the project and to get them to these wonderful organizations that we work with to get them what they need.
Thank you. And so what we're going to do with the follow-up, I know someone asked earlier, will we be sharing slides? The answer is yes. How do you get information to dads? We have a few ways to get information to dads. We'll ask that individuals can direct them to our Facebook page. We have brochures, we have flyers. And if I actually skip back a step, we actually have an online site, because we learned that dads actually are really, really responsive to online. They weren't emailing, they weren't calling. But we have a really, really simple interest sign-up form. This form works two ways, where fathers or individuals can sign themselves up on their own. And if you know that you work with a father, you can refer them yourself. One thing that we do want to point out, we do have a referral and enrollment incentive. So here, how did you find out about the study? Every month we run a special raffle for a gift card, just to throw something else out there, since we're asking people to, hint, hint, tell more dads about the project and what we're doing. As we get ready to wrap up, one other thing, if my screen would work, forgive me. One other thing that we wanted to make sure we really highlighted and invited you to. We touched the surface, like I said, a tiny, teeny bit. There's so much more that we need to talk about around identifying perinatal needs for dads. And we want to do that with you. If you are interested in participating with us, helping us identify fathers, helping us learn what you're learning about fathers, we want to hear from you. So on Thursday, April 28th, we will have, very similar to this, same time frame on Zoom, we'll have a session of community of learners with a variety of practitioners like yourself. And what's really cool is these sessions are really, really looking to target individual professionals from the Southeast Ohio region, but we'll invite more people to participate. It does have a stipend available. And what is really nice is by the time session 2 rolls around, we'll talk about specifically responding to identified needs and wraparound services. So remember, we said we have dads in really quickly, and we do what we call a warm handoff. We want to be able to say like, hey, Mike, hey, Shakita, hey, Angie, I have a dad who needs this, that, or the other. Whether that dad needs help with job support, he needs help with accessing childcare, he needs mental health or healthcare support for himself, other things around things specific for fathers in custody, or if that dad needs to find out, how do I help the mother of my baby or even another child in my family. We are not the experts. Y'all are. So the second session, it will be, if you can imagine, it will be a nice contained cap. The beginning, what dads do you all work with that we can learn together how to support them, ways that we might be able to support them, particularly with our Father's Feelings Project, and ways that you all can receive dads we serve and be ready to continue to receive dads as we all continue to boost and enhance paternal equity. The link is here and we'll drop it in the chat for how you can sign up, and it will be a part of the follow-up email that we send. We also ask that if you were looking for CEUs as a counselor, social worker, or marriage and family therapist, shoot us an email by this Friday, making sure you include your first and last name, profession, and license number, and we will get a CEU certificate out. And lastly, keep in touch with us. Don't be shy. We answer emails. Someone asked for our email and phone number before. That phone number is to our office, as well as that email. It goes to who it needs to go to, whether it's Brittany, Shakita, Mike, or Angie. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. And we thank you for attending. And we really, really hope and look forward to seeing some of you all next week at our April 28th session. And we thank you. So this is the end of the presentation, but what we'll do is I'll stay on for a few more minutes and make sure we answer any questions. Those of you who need the evaluation information, we'll make sure that we send that as a link to you as well. And we'll make sure we send you the Zoom information to sign up.
Brittany, just to make sure, the Zoom information on that last slide, that we're going to email that to participants if they want to participate in one of the upcoming sessions. Okay, wonderful.
Want to make sure I'm getting to your questions quickly. We will send out training certificates to everyone, and particularly if you are a therapist, counselor, social work, or MFT, we'll make sure we specifically align that for you on your certificate. If you don't have a license number, that's okay. You don't need one. I'm trying to make sure that we get to everyone. I think I got to everyone's questions. If I didn't, I'll make sure we look through the chat for questions and make sure that we include any questions we did not address in our follow-up email. And as again, we will share our the slides that we have here today. They won't have the videos of dads, unfortunately, but they will have all of the other links that we mentioned and all of our contact information. Because like I said, don't be shy. We're here available via phone, email, and on social media as well.
Thank you, Brittany. All right, guys, thanks for joining us. And everybody have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.